Hello, my name's Robert Rubin, and thanks for joining this discussion that we're having on my book in progress. Your contributions are very welcome because that's really what I'm looking back for. Is in addition to an interesting discussion, I'd like to have feedback on some of the ideas that I'm talking about. Um, so you can um, email me and get a copy of the chapters that we're discussing. Um, if you have missed a class, that's fine. Don't worry about it. Each one should be pretty much self-contained. Um, and I'll be happy to correspond with you and get you the information you need. We're unfortunately, since you're participating virtually, the audio and video are not going to be that great. We're using a device, I'm holding it up here, that's in the middle of the discussion table, and it gets a sort of 360-degree view of things, and it records the sound. But unfortunately, the microphone is not that great, and the video is not that good. So you'll have to put up with that. You can usually hear me because I'm loud and I talk with a pretty clear voice, but you may not be able to hear all the people who are participating. You'll see some of them, ones that are sitting around the table. There are others that are sitting further away who you can't see. I try to get them all to sit around the table, but it's not always as easy as it seems. So, with that said, welcome to the discussion, and I hope you'll tune in next week also, or next month. Thanks.
Well, thank you all for coming. This is not a specifically Episcopalian book. It's really meant generally about Christianity in general, and it's not really, doesn't have a particular doctrinal focus or anything like that. So I hope it will be, you know, whatever your background, it'll be something that is of interest to you. But I'll just talk a little bit about what the book's going to be and why I need your help. Um, the the book's going to be a big fat book, and it'll probably take me another year to finish it. That's going to be in 5 parts. This is what we'll be reading is the first part. It's 9 chapters, um, but it's going to have a chapter on this topic, which is sort of what puts people off and keeps people in our century, young people, and so forth, from getting involved with church and faith and Christianity in general these days. There's all these statistics out now about what are called the nuns, the people who believe in a higher power or God, but who have no affiliation with churches or any religious communities. And I think that one of the things that um, interests me is sort of what might be keeping those people away. What it is about faith in our century and the way we celebrate and observe our faith as Christians that is putting people off these days. Is it their fault or is it ours? As people, and so that's what the sort of first part of the book's about. The second part is a what's called a systematic theology. It's my attempt to sort of talk about how Christianity works as a belief that puts it together in a relevant way for people of this century. And I'm not trying to sort of write about the old time religion in the book. And then the third part will basically be my background is as a literature and professor and a writing professor, and I'm really going to talk about um, the power of the story of the Bible, and how in that third part will sort of be about what the story is telling us. Uh, and then the fourth part will be about churches and what different kinds of churches do. Evangelical, um, Catholic, uh, mainline Protestant, Pentecostal? What are some of the different approaches that have been taken, and what excites people about them, and what turns them off about them? And then the final part of the book will be sort of a vision of what Christianity can do in this century. It's sort of the Great Commission in our century. So it's, as you can see, it's going to be a big fat book with a lot of stuff, and that's was sort of one of the things that I noticed, is that when you go to the bookstore, you get books on, being a parent and a Christian, or devotions and things like that, and they're all sort of personal to your personal life, but there's very little out there about sort of how to put it all together and why it's relevant. And so that's sort of my thinking with the book. And my agent and I don't have a publisher yet. We're working on that, but I have every confidence this will happen. I've published about 5 books, and so I sort of know the publishing world. It's not going to be an academic book, even though I do have academic training. It's really, I've tried to, in the book, get rid of as much as I can the sort of churchy words that people have trouble with, things like hermeneutics. That's you read theology and you have words like that, and they sort of scare people off, I think. And so that my attempt is going to be to try to write about Christianity as a creative, imaginative experience, rather than as a rule-following experience. And so that's sort of the approach I take, the theological approach I take. And we'll see, how people respond to that. But that's what I wanted to start out talking to you all about. I hope you've had a chance to read those 2 introductions. They don't get too deeply into the meat of what we're talking about, of what I'll be talking about. But I wanted to sort of see what your thoughts and opinions are about things that, in your observation, people have difficulty with about being Christians and in church these days, and what some of the issues are. For instance, I started this chapter off with a bunch of bullet points about all these reasons why you wouldn't want, if you were just sort of out there, somebody said, why be a Christian? You have all of these reasons, right? Christians are fanatical. They make you feel bad. They do X, Y, and Z, and I asked sort of, is there a problem with the way with the way Christianity is perceived these days? And I'd be interested in your thoughts about what you've experienced, what you find important about it yourself, and what you think is misunderstood by people as they sort of see this subject. Because I don't know if you've had the same experience that I've had of sort of, I say, well, I go to the Episcopal Church, and they go, oh.
I got that. Well, that's almost the same as a cat.
So I would just like to open it up, excuse me, to you briefly, right up front before I start asking specific questions, and I'll probably ask some follow-up questions, and then in our next class, we'll actually, not class, discussion, we'll get into one particular aspect that I'm exploring, which is, in my opinion, one of the things that puts a lot of people off these days is how political Christianity has gotten, and how do we engage with that, and whether we should, or whether and so that's going to be the first sort of meaty thing. But right now it's just sort of a general discussion about what do you think is keeping the younger generation, say, away from church these days?
Electronics.
You think so?
Right.
Yeah.
Keeps them away from a lot of things.
Yeah.
But in COVID, we were, a lot of churches went online. And I don't think there was a big surge in church participation.
I do
No,
think,
probably people dropped off because,
yes, I think,
because
but I also have heard people who have not normally attended church found that opportunity to.
well, we
Watch
got
church.
we got a new couple coming here because they found us online, but for the most part, I think younger people stay away just because they don't have time.
Yeah.
They-
got kids.
Uh-huh. Yeah,
They
We
work
did
all week.
too,
they-
Donna. We had that also, and yet
we went.
somehow
yeah.
we found time
Well, when
to go to church. That was like part of your
yeah, but
upbringing, part of your schedule.
when I was a kid, they didn't schedule things on the weekend.
That's good.
When my kids were growing up, they started scheduling all the sporting events were on
Absolutely,
Sundays.
and
Oh.
baseball and cheering and all that on a
That's
Sunday is more
terrible.
important than going to church.
Yeah.
You know, it's the truth. So to go back to I think what you were asking, I don't think it's just that relevant to young people. You know.
Well, what is it that makes it not feel relevant, do
Okay,
you think?
so I put down why. I put down 5 reasons why I thought. I think the young people that I'm aware of, I'm 76. There are 99 people in my family. I am the 4th oldest. So everyone would be younger than me, other than are really millennials. So I kind of honed in on that age group. And they just they question a lot of the religious teachings. They, and for them, I think the questioning is good, but for them it's like, oh, creation theory. I mean, that's ridiculous. God did not create. And then they walk away from that. And there's no one around to then explain it to them. Well, what does this mean? To take that further. I think they're in opposition to some of the positions that are taken by some of the churches. And you could just see that now.
Yeah.
There's just a mass explosion of dissent, one way or the other. So I think that's part of it. I also wrote down they just don't like religious organizations.
Mm-hmm.
That's for them.
They
Okay,
don't.
maybe we'll go to church, but there's an organization affiliated with this. They want us to get involved deeper. We're just not going to do that. So it's not just going to church on a particular day of the week. It's getting more and more involved, which they don't want to do. I think some of them, they just don't believe in God. They just don't. God isn't relevant to them. And I'm not saying whether that's bad or good or evil or whatever. They just don't believe in God for whatever reason. And then the 5th one that I put down, which I said first, is that religion is just not essential in their life. That's just it.
Mhm.
You know, and we can agree or we can disagree with that, but I think maybe that should have been first. Religion is not important. I'm worried about paying off my mortgage, getting food on the table, getting my kids educated, working out a relationship with my spouse.
And all of those things are traditionally roles that the church helped people do.
Absolutely. They don't know that because they're not part of it. And maybe the structure of churches has also changed and we're not addressing these very issues. And therefore, the young people are just walking away. And I'm talking about people in their 30s and in their 40s. I'm not talking about teenagers.
Right.
That's who I'm talking about. That
Right.
millennial group, they're the ones. I'm sorry.
Well, I think another big problem is that so many churches do believe that creation story, and they reject any scientific explanation, and they don't seem to understand that the two are complementing one another. You can't say no, that's not right, and young people who are being taught this stuff in school, and they learn science and they learn about the Big Bang Theory and all that, and they believe that because it makes sense. Being told, well, no, God just snapped his fingers and it was all here, doesn't make sense to them.
Right.
And they do want to question. And I don't think that's, when I read this, I think this is a good thing that they're questioning. We grew up, I'm a Roman Catholic, grew up with a blind faith. It is what the church says it is, and we never questioned it. But as I think with young people today, I think in our spiritual journey, sometimes we wonder, and then we wander. The point is, we're now throwing away the baby with the bathwater. and those that are
The baby
watching.
Jesus with the bathwater.
Absolutely, absolutely. Or we just think it's a cute little holiday to spend and get gifts. The emphasis isn't going to be on the religious aspect,
Right.
that's for sure.
Right.
And that just, I think, also permeates from where these young people are coming from. They've either come from homes where perhaps religion was not essential, it was not important, or they might have come from such overly religious homes that they're now rejecting, rebelling, even
Right.
at the age in their 40s.
Well, other observations that haven't been touched on yet.
I think our culture has just become so secular.
I do.
And I think the mainstream media and just our whole culture does not support the idea of people being. I mean, it's often negative towards Christianity, in my opinion.
It is.
And like I know last Christmas when I was buying Christmas stamps for my Christmas cards, I had a really hard time because they had Santa Claus and they had winter scenes and they had the Madonna, and I'm not Catholic, and there wasn't anything that really resonated with me as a Protestant Christian. And I thought, what's going on here? Like, why has this happened? I also think that our young people in general have a really hard time thinking logically. I'm just being honest.
Yeah.
I'm 60.
Yeah.
And I just have there's so much of this feelings and people get just caught up in emotional things, and I don't think they're thinking and clearly thinking logically.
They're taught to be self-centered.
Correct.
They are.
Correct. I'm a school counselor. I didn't mention that. I also think, and this was going along with several of you mentioned families being so busy. I think our young families are exhausted, and they're trying to do everything, and you can't do everything.
Right.
And so that's, if mom and dad are working full time and they're trying to raise children and they don't have the church to help them, and I see that. I see lots of young families trying to do everything themselves, and they're frantic, they're desperate, but they don't know who to reach out to, and many of them are very isolated. They don't know their neighbors. They don't have a church family, and they're exhausted trying to take care of everything themselves. So when they get to Sunday, the last thing they want to do is get up and dress their children and go to church.
And they also don't have family around them. When I grew
Many of them
up,
don't have family.
we had
Yeah,
a
that's
New Year.
part of
I
it.
had aunts and uncles. I was one of 13 cousins. We all played with each other. And if you didn't like what your mother made, you went over to your Aunt Lucy, what she was cooking. These kids don't have that. There is no extension of their family.
One of the things we have seen, though, in recent years is it's maybe fading a little bit now, but it's still a major phenomenon, are these mega churches where you get thousands of people attending and a professional entertainment, a big show, big
Live bands.
bands.
It's like a rock concert.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
a performance.
It's a
Yes, it
performance.
is.
That
That's
goes
not
with what you
church.
said. It's
Yeah.
about feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It makes
Oh,
them
they
feel
feel
good. You
Mhm.
know, it
Yes.
kind of allows them to block away the other 6 days of the week, and they really have the opportunity. We remember when we had that, we went to that ecumenical Thanksgiving thing at the Baptist Church on Wilbon, and I brought my granddaughter, who at that time was 14, and it was Black and Baptist, and they had the music and the clapping. I said to my granddaughter, "Oh my gosh, you would make a great Baptist." She loved it. They had the guitar and the drum. People were clapping, and there was that sense of joy. And one of my things was, are we bringing joy into our services?
Well, one of the things that I've discovered in sort of writing this book, two things have struck me. One is that we've been in the latter part of the 20th century, many churches were sort of in a sort of recovery mode. For years, church was all about community and belonging with the group, right? And suddenly in about the 50s and 60s, that no longer became the goal. You wanted to be an individualist. You wanted to find your own way,
Be a radical.
or just sort of you didn't feel so worried about being part of the community in the way that you did uh, in the old times, and that in some ways is very good. It's what allows multiculturalism, many different cultures coming in, different ideas, new things. But it's also produces some tough reactions because from what I've been reading and what my research has sort of shown me, one of the real issues is what's known as the modern mindset, the modern era. And this is something that came in and around the 18th century and has continued pretty much through the 20th century. And it's this idea of, the only things that are true are what are provable and what you can sort of measure and test with your science. There's one truth, and the reaction that this caused in the church was pretty interesting. There were two different directions the church took. One was what's called the Christian Modernists, where they said, okay, well, we'll go out and we'll find the facts about what life was like in Jesus's time and what life was like in ancient Israel, and we'll talk about how the Bible was written and all those details. And the other reaction was, well, we still believe that there's one truth, and everything has to be provably true, but we're just going to focus on the Bible, and that's where we're going to take as our complete authority. And so we're going to so you get the sort of the evangelical fundamentalist reaction, which is saying that you've got to believe what's in the words here. They're literally true. There were dinosaurs on Noah's Ark and that kind of thing. And then you've got the liberal theologians who say, well, these are all just stories and stuff, and they're talking about the idea of God and the religious feeling, but we don't know about whether what was true and what was not. And how do you get excited about that, right? How do you get a religious feeling about that? And so those two things have been in tension for much of the 20th century. And what's happening now, and this is one of the things that the book is going to try to address, is there's what's called a kind of postmodern Christianity that's developing in theology. And it is a sort of both and approach. It's saying you don't have to choose between whether something is literally factually provable or something that is a matter of faith and feeling. It can be both. And that's one of the things I'm trying to sort of get at. And in some ways, I'm hoping that will be of interest to this new generation, this sort of postmodern approach to these ideas. Yes, Leanne?
Well, that makes me think of, I approach younger people sometimes, and I hear a lot of, this is a typical example. Do you believe in the supernatural? I say, oh yes. Oh, yeah. Do you believe in God? No. And I'm like, what's in the supernatural that you believe in? Demons, devils, evil. I mean, they're like, oh, I've seen it all on TV.
Well, the Ten Commandments is on TV.
Yeah, those preachy
a lot on
TV movies. And I've watched a couple of modern ones, but they don't really portray Jesus. I mean, I think, oh, this is going to be good. Yeah, and Jesus is like, I don't know, he's not like Jesus in the Bible. But I think the words Bible and Christianity anywhere, I think a lot of people wouldn't even look at it. Now, they might say it's God, but it said God is a supernatural being. It should say that up front. And because, like I said, people turn away from that language.
Well, when you don't believe the Bible is true, then you're kind of lost with that whole line of thinking. If you try to say this is what you should follow because the Bible says it, and then people are like, well, I don't believe the Bible, then that's the end of the conversation.
Yeah, you can't argue for religion with somebody who doesn't already have religion, because the Bible doesn't mean any more to them than
It's just a book.
Yet we still see 90% of people in polls say they believe in a higher power,
Yeah.
some kind of God. It's just that, the doctrines of various churches are not connecting with them. So here's sort of how I've broken out these 9 chapters that we'll be reading. The first one is the issue of politics. Do you have to be a white Republican to be a Christian these days?
apparently so.
That's what's one of the things that's happening. All Christians are getting lumped together to be the
Yes.
same, because only the radical fundamentalist evangelicals get the TV coverage.
That's
Right.
And so everybody thinks all
Yeah.
Christians are that way.
Yeah.
Not
Right.
say everybody, you know what I
Yeah,
mean.
the general culture.
That's a
thing.
grossly general statement.
So that's the chapter I put up first because I thought it was sort of the most controversial one. It may be too hard. We may find that when you read it that it's too hard a entry into this topic. But I think that's one of the things that
Yes. that's-
keeps
Well,
a lot of
and
people.
also the other thing about the political Christianity, even in our little tiny community here at Trinity, going through the election and the 4 years prior to it, we have people of different opinions in our little community, which, there was a point where I was like, how am I going to sit on the pew with that person ever again?
And we had some people who
And
left
we have
here.
people who left this church because others of us were a little more vocal, and not in church, but Facebook and this kind of thing. And so it's not just TV time evangelicals. It's in our own church communities too.
Robert, let me go back to something you were talking about believing the Bible or not. One of the things that's not taught, I don't think, is that the difference between factual truth and religious truth. And looking behind what's being said to look, for example, what is the message? It's really easy to see. What is the message in Genesis? Well, if you look at all of that, the religious truth is God created everything and it was good. If you look at the Deuteronomistic history, the story of Israel becoming a nation, what's the truth? The truth is, if you follow God, you will prosper, and if you don't follow God, you'll lose the next battle. And all through the Bible, I think we have to have two lenses: one of factual truth and one of because we all know there are different kinds of truth. If you read Harriet Uncle Tom's Cabin, okay, is it true? Well, no, it's fiction, but it has an underlying truth. You read a science book, a math book, it's true in its facts. And you can look at all kinds of poetry. Is it true? No, but it conveys the truth. And I think that's something we miss in looking at the Bible.
I completely agree. Carmen, you were going to say something too?
Well, I was going to go back talking about just political ideologies. One of the things that we didn't touch on earlier and reasons why young people sometimes don't see a need for the church is I don't know what y'all think about this, that some political ideologies have become a religion to people.
Yes,
Mhm.
yeah.
Because they have whole
Absolutely.
they meet their religious needs. They don't call it a religion in any way. Many people would probably be maybe shocked or horrified if I said that to them, but that's what I see.
What they believe.
Right.
That.
So the way I'm breaking this down is that's first thing. I call them stumbling blocks, things that people are tripping over, even though they have a feeling of faith, a wish to belong. They may even approve and like the message of Jesus. All right. But one of them is, how do I deal with the political side of Christianity these days? The second issue, which I think a couple of us have touched on it, and we'll do the next discussion on, is what I call doing Christianity right, which is you feel like, am I doing it right? You know, do I believe do I have to believe all these things and go through all these, you know, and say X, Y, and Z is true to be a Christian, right? Can I have doubts? You know, can I believe in Christianity if I wonder how Jesus could be both human and God, right? If I've learned a little bit about, you know, if I have doubts about supernatural things, what do I make about the miracles, right? And so am I doing it right? And if I say I have doubts, will I be called a heretic or a, you know, you're not a Christian, right? And I think that's one thing that keeps people away. The third one is sort of related to that, and I call it Chapter 3, One Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, which is the idea that there's only one way to be a Christian. That's, you know, the church. Christianity has traditionally talked about the church, even though we have, I think on most recent count, 20,000 different denominations of Christians across the world. What is the church today? Right?
All of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But some of them don't recognize each other as being the church.
Yeah.
You know, you talk to an evangel. I have a family who are my in-laws, who are basically sort of evangelical in their approach, and they consider Mormonism a cult.
Yeah.
Yes.
You know, and that kind of thing. Well, I mean, they don't recognize it as the church, but how do we, you know, when we think about the church, what is that today? The fourth thing is the question of literalism. You know, do we have to believe literally in what the Bible says? And if we do believe it literally, are we making sort of an idol out of the Bible? You know, sort of a golden calf that we worship instead of God, instead of Jesus. And that's, I think, something that sort of puts people off, because they say, you know, well, I have doubts. I don't understand what the Bible is telling me. How do we approach the Bible as 21st century people who have seen science, have seen people go to the moon, have seen the space telescopes?
The edge of the universe.
You're right. Then the next chapter is sort of interesting. I hope it will be interesting, is that most churches ask you to say what you believe. They say, we will recite the creed. We believe in X, Y, Z. We confess ABC. This is our corporate belief. And people come in and say, well, I don't know that I can promise those things. Right? And that's something that they feel awkward about. What do we do about that? The next one is what I call in Jesus' name. And I think this particularly with a lot of the young people has been an issue. When you see historically all the terrible things that have been done in the name of Christianity, you know, conquering crusades, the Inquisition, colonialism, you know, spreading, you know, even in America. I mean, I was really interested to learn that Quakers were hung in Boston Common as late as the 1660s by Puritans because they weren't the right kind of Christians, right?
Well, we took over this country because the people that lived here were heathens.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So that's I think a barrier to a lot of people.
Well, and actually, I have someone in my family who is very upset, doesn't want us to celebrate Thanksgiving because of this.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, look at South America. You know, that evangelizing the people in South America was the excuse to kill them and steal all their gold.
And I think a lot of people can't forgive Christianity and Islam too, for that. Now, of course, the Jewish people have been traditionally on the receiving end of that. But if you read the Bible and you read, the book of the story of Joshua and the conquering of Canaan, the Israelites were killing hundreds of thousands of people to take over their land. So, it's not like any particular faith seems to be immune to this criticism. So I think that's, a question that a lot of people today say, well, how do I reconcile my sense that bad things have happened with my sense that faith in God should be good? God is good. God loves us. God's a loving God. Yet people have done these bad things. Well, I think that there are answers to that, good answers to that, and reasons. And what you have to say is, well, we've missed the point, and we've got to do better in a lot of ways. I think one of the issues is that for 2,000 years, Christianity, and I'm mostly speaking about Christianity, has been associated with power. It has been the religion of kings and conquerors and popes and people who are running things and empires. And yet when you look at where it came from, the reason Jesus was crucified was that he was opposing an empire, right? And so Christianity goes through this transition from being sort of the outsiders who are preaching in Jesus's name and Jesus's words to becoming the official religion of the Roman Empire. It becomes the religion of the empire that crucified Jesus. And so it's one of these really tricky issues that and the church, as it develops, comes to represent, in a lot of people's minds, the establishment, the authority. And one of the reasons the Episcopal Church in America produced so many presidents in the first centuries of the American Republic was that all the big wigs were Episcopalians, because that was the establishment, powerful church that sort of had inherited that from England, right? And so you had people like George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and others like that who were ostensibly Episcopalian. Less true recently, but there's that association of church with power, and I think that's been an issue. The next chapter that I'm talking about is consumerism. And I don't know if you all have ever encountered this, but people say, well, I'm going to go to this church, and then if they say something I don't like, I'll go to another one that says something I do.
Shopping.
Go church shopping, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how do you think we should respond there? I mean, we do know you can go to a church that is not feeding you spiritually and that is saying things that you disagree with. So should you just leave, or should you try to make things better? What do you think?
Another aspect of consumerism, I think, is the attitude that many churches have had. And here's an example for you Episcopalians. The Episcopal Church welcomes you on all those signs. And then for a while it said, the Episcopal Church, we're here for you. Take from us what you need, not come in and be a part, which I think reflects that consumerism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. What does it give you? Right? What do I get from it? And then religion just becomes something like your big screen TV, right? And that we were talking about what the kids do. Right? Well, the big screen TV is actually more entertaining than an hour on a hard pew. And so if they're equivalent, right? What are people going to choose?
At the mega churches, they get cushy seats. Right. They get the live entertainment. They get my niece goes. Yeah, my niece goes to a church where her minister actually has like 8 churches, and he preaches at a different one every Sunday, and it's just broadcast into the other ones.
Wow.
So they only see him in person once every 2 months.
That's big time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
How do
you-
they do pastoral care? I mean, there's more to the church than just the preaching
Yeah, a lot of-
aspect.
I'm familiar with a lot of those churches. They many of them will have a local campus pastor. May or may not do the preaching. It depends on the model. But years ago, I went to Andy Stanley's church one time in Atlanta, and
That's where she goes.
okay. So when I went, I was so shocked. I went in, and about halfway through the sermon, I poked my husband. I said, "He's not real," and it looked like a hologram. So that they divided every Sunday. They divide the. Now this was years ago. They divided the congregation into two groups, and one group would get him live, and the other group would get a hologram of him.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean that's they did.
I have
the best
never
they
heard.
could.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hologram of you, Father Bob.
It wasn't really a hologram, but it was such a good video production. That's what I thought. They had a live band, but the pastor was really in another facility
Wow.
on the same campus.
Wow. And those the mega churches do pastoral support, and they have a big,
they have-
set of employees and volunteers who go out and
Yes.
do deal with individuals. So it's not like they don't do it, but it's just a very different kind of situation than a small church like this. For instance, our whole diocese in North Carolina in the Episcopal Church is the size of some megachurches, individual megachurches. 10,000.
Yeah. There are
members.
8 different facilities for this church, and you come in and it's like you're walking into a when you walk in, they have all these booths set up, and you can go to Starbucks, and you can, yeah, and once the service starts, you can't come and go. If you leave the auditorium, you can't go back in.
Security.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. So
It's
the
disruptive.
last two on my list, chapters 8 and 9, are the ones you've probably thought about, but one of them is the atheism question. How do we deal with the scientists and authority figures from our universities and so forth that say, well, there's no, God is just a myth. I don't pay attention to that. I just do the science. All right. So how do we deal with that as people who feel the urge to faith, who feel like, when I go out and hike, I hike a lot. When I go out and hiking and I'm on the Appalachian Trail and I see the vista of the mountains open up, it just brings an incredible spiritual feeling to me.
Yes.
But I can't prove that that's a spiritual thing, right? But the more I read, it's one of these things where people of faith can't prove that there is a God, but people who are atheists can't prove that there isn't. And there are ways to look at them and say they're both and. You can believe in evolution, you can believe in the Big Bang and still believe in God. And you're being true to this feeling that you have, this urge, this
Sense of wonder.
wonder and beauty and creativity and imagination.
That's one of the things I liked about this, that you brought that in.
Yeah, I'm very much of that approach, is that I think we have to, one of the things that Jesus says is you have to love God with all your heart and all your soul, but also all your mind. And I think you have to it's an imaginative, creative experience, and not a rule following experience.
I think that goes back to things that we were saying earlier about that we're just so busy that we don't allow ourselves that time and space to wonder or to be awed, not as an awesome, but to be awed. I'm laughing at our priest says that he hates the word awesome, but
well, and this goes
But
all back to what you said earlier about, phones and social media and technology is taking, but our children, I'm an elementary school counselor, our children have no time to be bored.
right,
And they have no time to think and to ponder and wonder.
We structure everything.
And everything. They always have earphones on.
Yeah, and so if they're in the
Yeah.
car, they don't have time to
Terrible.
think and look out the window. They're watching a movie or
In a
they're
restaurant, you see families going for
Mhm.
dinner, and everybody has their damn cell phone
Right.
out. It's like
It's
you're
awful.
family.
Well,
Why
they do
aren't
it
you
at home
talking?
too. You sit
I
around the
know.
dining room table and
I
everybody's
know.
looking
they
at their
don't
phone.
even sit around the dining room
They
table.
don't.
No, I do
That's
polls
what it
in my
is. It
classrooms,
is.
and I
You're
ask
right.
every year. I ask kids. I say, "How
Absolutely.
many of you eat dinner together?" And
Right.
usually it's 50% or less
Wow.
sit down around the
Yeah.
table and eat dinner. It's not a thing anymore.
Which means they don't even have any meals together.
Correct.
And the last chapter that we'll talk about in some ways is the hardest one, which is cynicism. I think that a lot of people today are taught that to protect yourself, you have to be cynical. You have to say, whatever I hear, it's BS. Whatever they're selling, it's BS. I can't buy it. If I just listen to it, I'm going to be suckered in. You know, these mega churches are just after my money. These evangelical churches are just Republicans after my votes. You know, X, Y, and Z. And where does that come from? And how do we wrestle with that? That sort of, because that's sort of it's a defensive mechanism that we have to some extent, adopt as modern people these days. When we get these telephone calls, these robocalls, right? If you sit there and answer them and talk to them politely, and you're going to be in trouble pretty soon, right?
Yeah, they
No.
call and tell you that your social security number is compromised, or somebody spent
Right.
$1,000 on your Amazon account. Or,
So how do we get past the idea that this is all just a con job? And I think that's what, so these are the answers that I've come up with. Do you have any other ideas before we close down in the last 5 minutes or so about
I think
things I might talk
I
about?
think there's a lot of messages in TV shows that children watch and young people and even adults. And that it's constantly being hammered in that all this is nonsense, everything is materialism. And I think after a while it just becomes normal. You know, well, I heard it on TV or I saw it on the internet. But how do you know that that person is an authority, that they know what they're talking about? Because I get it from my granddaughter. Oh, I saw it on, I said, doesn't mean a thing. What are their qualifications to tell you that? Oh, well, they said it. You know, it's like they don't dig
it
deep.
must be true. It's on
It
the
must be
internet.
true. It's on the internet.
I think
That's
that,
right.
I think that that's a common human
Yeah.
characteristic.
I think so.
People tend to believe,
Yeah.
and
Uh-huh.
oftentimes what they want to believe.
Yes.
And
right.
The lady I work with, one of them is a Trumpster, and in some conversation came up, and I said that the purpose of religion is to teach you to ask the right questions, not give you the answer.
Right.
That was like Chinese to her. And I think that the problems you're addressing are acute problems and are accurate. In a consumer society, religion becomes another thing to consume. And but Jesus's method or message was contrary in his time.
Yes.
And I suppose that hasn't changed, because people don't like poor people living next to them.
Right.
I am a planning director,
Mhm.
and everybody
That's
didn't.
true.
They didn't want these
Not in my backyard.
1500s.
That's right.
I mean, and not even just affordable housing, just more housing.
Yeah.
I've got mine.
You
So
move on.
some of his
More expensive, the better.
teachings have always been contrary.
And I think that one of our challenges as the church in this century is to get past that sort of status quo idea. For instance, when I was a college teacher, I used to have to teach Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail to my students. And if you've never read it, what it is mostly a letter in which he's calling the local clergy people to task and saying, you all wrote this letter saying, I'm being too radical, I'm being too hasty, we need to sort of talk, but wait has always ended up being never. And so often, churches, and Trinity is no exception, our little church here, but and I imagine the churches that you've belonged to, they worry about if we have upsetting things said from the pulpit, will people leave? Will we lose our financial footing? Will we survive as a group? And so the tendency is to try to say things that's not going to drive people out the door, that make them think maybe, but keep them in, right? And so it tends to be, you tend to get from a lot of churches, particularly sort of mainline Protestant churches, sort of a status quo message coming across. What's going on out in the world is got problems, but here in the church we've got Jesus, and we're going to try to, make our good feelings fix the world rather than saying, we're part of the problem. And so that's one of the issues I think that I've found.
One of the issues that I found is people may talk about religious subjects or spiritual subjects, and they say, how can I believe in a God who allows this horror to happen?
Right.
And God is that mean, and they just have God as some president directing, and that's a very limited view of God. But a lot of people say that.
They do.
Yeah, I
You're
don't
right.
know if you can have them look from a much longer term view, or from the way God sees these things, or just from the way that it was a choice of some person to do that. It wasn't God doing it. And they say, well, God let anything happen. No, people have free will. Yeah.
Well, some of these new theological ideas are sort of interesting because they suggest that maybe God doesn't work that way. He doesn't go in and fix this and fix that and tell you to do this and do that, but rather he's a encourager, an urger, trying to get us to do the right thing. But he can't make us do the right thing.
He gave us free will.
Yeah, and there are good theological reasons for saying that, and it makes people say, "But God is omnipotent. He can do anything." Well, maybe.
Kill a dead mule?
Yeah.
Can he do what?
Kill
Can
a
he
dead
kill
mule.
a dead mule?
I like that. Well, anyway, thank you all so much for being willing to talk to me about these things, because this is really, I mean, one of the things that I've found is that a lot of the books that are written about this are written either for pastors or for people who are just desperate to believe in something that will solve their personal problem. And what I want to try to do is put things together in a big picture way and sort of say, let's think about this as a package, and I'm going to try not to get too intellectual about it, even though I come from that background, and try to make it practical. And so it's really important to me, as you read these chapters, when you think I'm getting out of control with my ideas, to call me on it and say, I think you're wrong for these reasons, and you also sound like you're teaching a class of college students. So that's going to be really helpful to me.
I was thinking the same thing.
I can't grade you though.
That's okay. That's even better. Pass fail.
Well, as you were going through highlighting the chapters, I saw another issue. I think it's the we versus them, or it's I versus others. If they don't believe the way I do, or if our church doesn't go along with that kind of separatism versus unity and community.
And inclusiveness, yes.
Yeah, and
I would think about how many here have found Trinity different from an earlier church experience.
Definitely.
I think there's only 3 here that are cradle Episcopalians.
I
So
am.
something, yes, you won, and Catherine, I think, and maybe another, maybe Bob. And so something about this particular community, I like that term, community has attracted these people.
But Trinity has not been immune to that. We had a split in 2009 where half the church went off to another church.
Including the Trinity.
Well, thank you all so much. I won't keep you anymore. It's been an hour, but if you have any further thoughts after our talk, please feel free to email me. And if there are particular things you would like to talk about over the course of these 9 weeks, let me know, and I'll make sure that we do that.
Thanks, Bob.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay.
Very cool.